Pokemon is a household name in popular culture today that had an unforgettable introduction to the world back in the mid to late 90s. Known then as Pokemania, children and preteens were so consumed with all things Pokemon that Time magazine dropped this November 1999 issue declaring the event a pestilential Ponzi scheme. In hindsight, Pokemania seems like a harmless obsession that took Japan, then the rest of the world by storm. But it's also easy to see the concern some of those on the outside had. Seeing kids driven by their feverish need to gotta catch 'em all, and not to mention the strain it put on parents' wallets. So how did Pokemon find its way into the world? Why were some people so cautious of it? And what are some of the more positive memories for those of us who lived it? Pokemon was created by Satoshi Tajiri and his company Game Freak, first beginning the game's development for Nintendo back in 1990. An avid collector of bugs and small animals during his youth, Satoshi conceived the game as a way to relive his childhood, seeing the potential of the Nintendo Game Boy's link cable and wanting to create a game based not only on fighting, but one that could create a sense of community, sharing, and trading between friends. Initially called Capsule Monsters, the title was later changed to Pocket Monsters to avoid trademark confusion in Japan. Nintendo was skeptical of the idea at first, but still went ahead and greenlit its production. The game remained in development for 6 years, nearly bankrupting Game Freak if it were not for the backing of another company, Creatures Inc. Finally, on February 27, 1996, Pocket Monsters red and green versions were released on the Game Boy in Japan. The games had a slow start being on the aging Game Boy and received very little coverage in the media. But unlike other games that spiked quickly in sales before tapering off, Pocket Monsters started slow and gradually gained more ground as time went on. The perceived downside of the Game Boy actually became the game's greatest strength, as the device was already widely in circulation and affordable in price, increasing its and Pocket Monsters' accessibility. That desired communal effect Satoshi sought out was actually working. Pocket Monsters was a game that required trading and sharing to truly complete the game, by not only beating the story mode, but also collecting all 150 creatures between both its green and red versions. And the kids were hooked. It didn't take long for a manga series and trading card game to both follow in 1996, as well as an anime that was put into production once the games took off. The anime quickly became the most watched children's program in Japan in 1997. But on December 16th of that same year, the show would come under heavy scrutiny after an aired episode hospitalized 618 children for seizure-related incidents due to lights rapidly flashing on the screen, which caused the show to be pulled for 4 months and temporarily plummeted Nintendo stock. Despite this hiccup, by 1998, Pocket Monsters had sold nearly 9 million games and 400 million trading cards in Japan alone. In the same year, a third game, Pokemon Blue, was released with other sequel titles being put into development. The first trace of Pokemon making its way to the rest of the world came during meetings over license agreement renewals between Nintendo and 4Kids Entertainment CEO Al Kahn in late 1997. As the story goes, Kahn saw a group of children gathered around each other's Game Boys, then another, and then another. When he started asking around about what these kids were playing, he was told the same answer every time: Pocket Monsters. When he broached the subject with Nintendo execs, they brushed it off, claiming American kids had no interest in RPGs. That didn't deter Kahn though, and he offered to front all of the money to get Pocket Monsters stateside. So an agreement was reached. Nintendo of America would oversee, release, and offer advertising for the games, while 4Kids would be allowed to promote the brand and air the anime. Then Kahn made one historical suggestion: make the name, Pocket Monsters, into something cooler and much shorter: Pokemon. The plan to bring Pokemon to the United States in 1998 was quickly put into place. The first drop would be the anime that would serve as promotion for the games. News of the seizure incident the year prior would raise some concern in America, leaving the franchise's potential success already in doubt. Meanwhile, 4Kids would do some heavy editing to make the anime less Japanese and more location neutral, by, taking out rice balls and turning them into
"These donuts are great! Jelly-filled are my favorite!"
Nothing beats a jelly-filled donut.
For kids, Nintendo of America spent the majority of 1998 readying America for Pokemon, pushing promotional VHS tapes and print advertisements. Nintendo Power Magazine would begin teasing the franchise in early 1998 before formally announcing in May its coming arrival. The final major promotional piece occurred on August 27, 1998 in Topeka, Kansas, where the city would be renamed Topekachu for a day and host a Pokemon party with up to 3,000 guests in attendance. Plush Pikachus were dropped from planes. Pikachu Volkswagen Beetles would roll in where kids could both play the soon-to-be-released games Red and Blue and also watch the anime. Finally, on September 7th, 1998, the anime debuted in the US, followed by Red and Blue on September 28th. To say for kids and Nintendo of America's promotional efforts were successful would be an understatement, as 400,000 retail orders of Red and Blue were made in the first 2 weeks of the release, with store shipments selling out the day they arrived. Meanwhile, the anime also quickly became a hit, despite being aired in poorly syndicated time slots, and was eventually picked up by Warner Brothers to air on the WB network. The floodgates were opened. With the games and anime unleashed on the American public, a lot of the Pokemon allure could be attributed to the trickles of Japan's own Pokemania finding its way overseas. There was talk of a Japanese-only green version, a popular trading card game that allowed fans to collect and fight Pokemon another way, and then there were rumors about a mysterious 151st Pokemon the developers snuck into the games. There was not only an element of collecting and discovering Pokemon, but the communal word-of-mouth aspect of spreading secrets and communicating with one another was working on American kids too, just like how it worked on Japanese kids. By March 1999, the Red and Blue versions were the best individually sold game ever.
The cream, yeah.
Having pushed out 1.7 million units, and then another 800,000 between then and June. Hasbro won the $325 million contract to produce the merchandise worldwide, with the exception of Asia, but couldn't keep up with the demand. VHS sales of the anime were through the roof. Pokemon Yellow was released outside of Japan in 1999 and became the fastest selling handheld game of all time. Every piece of Pokemania that Japan got to experience soon found its way to the US and the rest of the world. The first Pokemon film, Mewtwo Strikes Back, stylized as Pokemon the first movie in the States. Riveting title. Came out in 1999, peaking at the time as the highest grossing video game movie of all time. The trading card game arrived in late 1998, selling 50 million cards by March 1999, and continued to regularly sell out and create a frenzy in schoolyards. Other Pokemon games came out that helped the struggling Nintendo 64 console out with some much needed sales, and Sydney became the landing ground for the first ever competitive international Pokemon tournament. There was no event associated with Pokemon that wasn't absolutely massive at the time. If Pokemon's name was on it, it was sure to be successful, and there seemed to be no end to the obsession. After all, I was there and very much a participant. You know where this is going, and here are my Generation 1 cards. The holos, of course, are on the front page. If anyone out there sees something valuable, let me know. They're certainly not in mint condition because of course you had to take them out and smudge your little fingers all over them. My experience playing Pokemon was definitely a shared one. My cousin had blue and I had red. Together we got to experience the whole thing together out of both a necessity to trade and because it was fun to share secrets and tips. More specifically, I remember being in Walmart one time, feverishly looking through a strategy guide. Some kid saw me, he came by, he struck up a conversation. And I just remember my dad watching on like in amusement as me and this guy would talk this language of Pokemon. And that is the kid that taught me how to use TM01 Cut. I wasn't and still am not very good at video games, but Pokemania was more than just a game. It was, as in this example, a community. Coming back to Times Magazine critique of the event, however, it's clear that there were a lot of concerns about the constant consumption of Pokemon by kids. There were, of course, some religious fanatics that condemned the franchise in the most theatrical way possible.
How to fantasy roleplay. Pokemon world is a world of the demonic, of the satanic. But while you might not take it quite seriously, I assure you that demons take it quite seriously.
Other stories came out, especially in regards to trading and collecting the cards, such as children being charged with armed robbery, stabbing other kids, and facing accusations of being gambling addicts. It became commonplace for principals to ban anything Pokemon on school premises. That was definitely the case at my school. But in defense of us kids at the time, I remember some dude that looked like the neckbeard from Toy Story 2 trying to wheel and deal with me at a trading card event at the mall that sincerely creeped my mom out. The kids were definitely not the only degenerates out there. I think most parents were under the assumption that Pokemon was mostly harmless, despite the cash they were dishing out, but it was hard to not pay attention to the hysteria and wonder just how long and how far this thing would go. In some of the more extreme events, Turkey banned Pokemon outright after some children tried to attempt flying, and Saudi Arabia outlawed it, claiming it to be a part of an international Zionist conspiracy. There certainly is a corporate sheen glossed all over Pokemania. The Time magazine article goes as far to call out Pokemon for teaching kids about the unhealthy habits of acquisitiveness. While Pokemon provided kids an imaginative world they could call their own, the incessant need to gotta catch them all at any cost was pretty cutthroat for people at the peak of their innocence. But like any good fad, the mania eventually lost steam. Pokemon Gold and Silver were released in Japan in 1999, and then the rest of the world in 2000. The second Pokemon movie, The Power of One, or Pokemon the Movie 2000 in America, again with the riveting titles, also came out in 2000. But these were the last big hoorahs for the era of Pokemania. As I recollect, after Gold and Silver came out, I was pretty much over it. The lackluster numbers for Pokemon Crystal in 2001 and Ruby and Sapphire in 2002 would ultimately prove that. Of course, Pokemon was now a phenomenon too big to fade completely into obscurity. It had now supplanted its rightful place in popular culture, as today the franchise continues to roar on as the most profitable franchise in the world. But the footprint Pokemania left behind is also more obvious than ever now. Back when the likes of anime like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z couldn't initially catch on with American children, Pokemon kicked the doors open for both of these and many other anime to be successful and helped the medium become the powerhouse it is today. And it certainly played a large role in cultivating and normalizing what we recognize as weeb and nerd culture, compared to when nerdy niches were definitely not as socially accepted among kids. The greatest evidence of Pokemania's lasting effect, though, I believe, is Pokemon Go's arrival in 2016. The biggest age demographic when it was first launched was actually 18 to 34-year-olds, indicating those of us who got to live Pokemania were the ones eagerly itching to get a taste of it all over again. And from my own perspective, seeing people gathered by the masses in pursuit to catch them all again was definitely the sign that Pokemania, despite the corporate trance it may have had over us kids, will always be remembered for those we got to share it with. Let's do the housekeeping. Tell me what you remember most about Pokemania. Was it the games? Was it the trading card game? How many times did you beg your parents to go to Burger King to get these toys? Did you also have a Japanese Holo 1999 Charizard that you traded to your little cousin, who of course misplaced it and lost it forever? That's me. Comment below, I want to hear all of your stories. Please like and subscribe. I'll see ya, don't litter.